So the title of the talk is The Buddha as the Goal. The Buddha as the Goal. And the whole title for the whole theme is the wheel, the spiral, and the goal. So since the beginning of the year, we've been doing this theme, the wheel, the spiral, and the goal. So we're at the goal bit. So we've got a few weeks on the goal though, so we're not quite at the end of the theme, so keep coming for the rest of this theme. But yeah, we're moving on from the wheel, from the spiral, to the goal. So what is this goal that I'm going to be talking about tonight? So you can see the goal as the Buddha. So I could just stop talking now and we could just keep looking at the Buddha and see where we get to. So the Buddha as our example, as a manifestation of reality, as an embodiment of enlightenment. So the Buddha as the goal. And the Buddha as an image, as a figure, as an ideal, contains and represents our deepest, our most noble desires. So our deepest desires are contained within the Buddha. The Buddha represents our inner potential and the highest human potential that we can all develop. And I'm thinking of the goal as how we know what to aim towards. So if the Buddha is the goal, then that's us knowing how we can aim towards realising our highest potential. Enlightenment, it might not be something that we can achieve and appropriate and add on to us, but it is something that we can move in the direction of and we can become enlightened. And once we're enlightened, we will be acting as enlightened beings in the world. So yes, this goal is aiming towards the direction of enlightenment. And I was thinking this isn't actually such a trendy idea. I don't know if you relate to this, but seeing the spiritual life, seeing any kind of momentum towards a goal, being on a path and moving towards a goal, in some ways isn't very fashionable. But then in other ways it's really fashionable. I don't know if some of you know, you get like hashtag relationship goals, hashtag house goals. This is kind of social media speak. So in some ways it's very fashionable to have something to aim towards, but in other ways, and particularly with spiritual lives, what I kind of pick up on is it's not that fashionable. So people really like to talk in terms of authenticity and how we just want to see what emerges in our spiritual path, spiritual life. We don't even really want to be on a path. We just want to grow, see what emerges. We want it all to be just very organic. So people use this word organic. And actually I'm quite a fan of the word organic, but in its real kind of sense of how something that's organic is growing naturally. But it is growing towards something. Usually if it's a plant, it's growing towards the sun. So our spiritual life isn't random. We do need to put conditions in place to grow towards a particular direction. If we want to grow towards realising our fullest potential, there's a particular direction that we can aim towards within that. And this is the goal. This is the Buddha enlightenment as the goal. And I was reading a bit of what Sangharakshita had to say as the path, about the path and the goal. So I'm going to read out a quote from Sangharakshita from Know Your Mind about the path as a symbol, just to help us kind of get a sense of the path. Okay, so he says, the path is a symbol representing the fact that we can change, we can develop. If we know what we are now and what we can become, we can take steps to effect that transition. People coming in every door, it's great. Come in. We have the capacity and the freedom to perceive and to realise our best interests. It's great, isn't it? Then he also says that according to the Pali phrase, we develop the path. It is not something out there, an objective thing. We are the path. If we think of it as something out there, like a road or a track, we may get stuck with an unhelpful notion of the spiritual discipline required in order to follow it. One is not following the Buddha's path if one feels that one is being driven along it like a sheep, rather wishing one could stray off and have a nibble on some succulent wayside shrub or flower. He goes on to say that there is certainly an objective criterion of development which one has to understand and act upon, But the path itself is not out there, it is in here. The path is you in the process of organising your mental states in such a way that growth and development will take place in a positive direction. I just thought that was really helpful. Sangharashtra there being very clear about what the path is and why we can move in this positive direction towards enlightenment, towards our goal. And that's what we've been looking at throughout this whole theme, the wheel, the spiral and the goal, is how we can organise our mental states in such a way that growth and development will take place in a positive direction towards enlightenment. So it might not be groovy, but I think we're all in the right place. So yeah, just summarising that, the path and the goal, it needs to be the direction that we see ourselves that we ourselves see to be the way that we can ultimately realise our own potential. So we need to see that for ourselves. If we have a direction that we want to move in, a goal that we're aiming for, we can better know whether we're on track towards that goal. And I think of it as a bit like a spiritual compass. If we want to go north, we need to kind of know which direction to go in. And therefore, if we're going in a different direction, we'll know we're going in a different direction, and we can gently bring ourselves back towards the direction we want to go in. Or at least we know, okay, that's a different direction here. You know, it gives us that clarity. So if our goal is enlightenment, what is enlightenment? What does enlightenment mean? And we can outline some of the different qualities of the Buddha as the embodiment of reality, of enlightenment. And I will do that this evening, and we'll carry on doing that throughout the theme. But ultimately, enlightenment is beyond our current experience, and so because of this, it's quite deeply mysterious to us. Having said that, there are some traditional ways of describing enlightenment, so let's start there. Some descriptions of enlightenment frame it as something in the negative, and I don't mean that as in like something that you don't kind of aspire to, but in the negative, you could see enlightenment as the end of suffering. So this is what enlightenment isn't. Enlightenment is the end of suffering, or it's a complete cessation of craving, cessation of hatred, cessation of delusion. And the word for enlightenment that's often translated as enlightenment is nirvana, which literally means blown out or extinguished. So this is the kind of negative way of framing enlightenment. It's the end of something, the end of suffering, the end of craving. It's also sometimes described in positive ways. So enlightenment is described as the place of bliss, or the supreme joy, the tranquil and the calm. So that's trying to give you a flavour of what enlightenment is. And I'm going to put kind of in the middle between those two, I'm going to put freedom in, because we all love a bit of freedom. And so you can be free from suffering, but freedom in itself, you know, is a positive experience, one could say. And other ways of describing enlightenment traditionally are to use similes or kind of poetic way of describing what it might be like. So some of these are the cool cave, the island amidst the floods, which is pretty relevant at the moment, the further shore, or the holy city, or in one sutta, which again I think is relevant to us here in Sheffield, a delightful stretch of level ground. So that's trying to give us a flavour of enlightenment, describing enlightenment in these different ways. But as I said, it is deeply mysterious, it's beyond our current experience. And this is why sometimes we might find we need to engage our imagination to connect more deeply with enlightenment. And we may choose to use the language of poetry, like those similes that I was just giving. We might use myth, symbols, art to get a better sense of what enlightenment is, to get a better sense of the Buddha. And this role of the imagination, the role of symbols, of art, that's helping us to align with something that is true, but that's really quite hard or even impossible to access through our conceptual, rational mind. So because enlightenment is completely beyond our current conception of reality, and because our potential realised as enlightenment, that's completely beyond our current conceptions of who we are now. We're not really aware at the moment of what we're capable of through growing towards achieving enlightenment. There will be a total transformation of our being at that point. So we do need to imagine, what would that be like? And as we imagine it, we're more likely to be moving in that direction, aligning with what is true, aligning with enlightenment. But it's difficult, it might be quite tricky to imagine what's unimaginable. So I'm basically saying it's so mysterious, it's really hard to know what it is. It's really hard to kind of use your conceptual mind to understand it. So we do need to imagine, we do need to use our imaginative faculty. But if it's unimaginable, how can we do that? And one way is to have a figure or have something that embodies what it is that we're trying to imagine. So that's how the Buddha comes into this talk. He is the embodiment of enlightenment. So reflecting on the Buddha, recollecting the qualities of the Buddha can help us to move towards enlightenment itself. And when he was alive, he was a teacher, he was a guide, he was a spiritual friend to his disciples. He was an enlightened being acting in the world. And it would have been very strong to actually be in the presence of the Buddha. And in the Pali Canon, in the stories of people meeting the Buddha, many gain enlightenment on the spot, just from his example, from the strength of his example. And then, after the Buddha was alive, he died, or he reached parinirvana, and I'll come back to that later. So he wasn't around, he wasn't acting in the world anymore as a physical being. And so for those that couldn't be with him anymore after he died, and for people that came along after he died, like us, but back through the centuries, there became the practice of recollecting the Buddha, connecting with the qualities of enlightenment through recollection of the Buddha. And people do this to stay in touch with the qualities of enlightenment because we don't have a Buddha right here. So we have images, and we can imaginatively connect with the Buddha as a way of connecting with enlightenment. So the Buddha is a historical figure, and you can kind of make contact with the historical figure of the Buddha through maybe reading about him, reading the early texts, even going to India. We do run pilgrimages from Sheffield, and many of you have been on those. There's going to be another one in a couple of years to connect with the historical figure of the Buddha. And the Buddha is also a symbol of enlightenment, a mythic figure that we can connect with on an emotional mythic level as well, calling the Buddha to mind in our imagination. And they're not completely separate, like I have found when I have gone on pilgrimage to the Buddhist sites in India, hearing the stories of the Buddha in the actual place where he was purported to be. It fills out the Buddha in my mind. People nodding who've been there. So we have this beautiful image here that we bring out on the introductory course. So this is an image by Arloka, an order member within Sri Ratna who lives near Norwich. And for those of you who've been to the Pamaloka Retreat Centre, you'll be familiar with this image and lots of others by Arloka, and you've probably seen prints of his. And it's a men's retreat centre, but you can go and visit. So if you're interested in seeing incredible images of the Buddha and other Buddhist figures, I'd really recommend going and seeing these works of art in real life. But here we have a, what do you call it, a version, a replication of that image. Anyway, this isn't the original, but here we have the Buddha as Arloka has painted him, and we bring him out on the intro course, and we use this image as a way to try and get a flavour of the Buddha, try and get a flavour of enlightenment. So just remind yourself of this image for a couple of minutes. See what you respond to in the image, see how it makes you feel. Okay, so what we tend to draw out on the intro course when we get people to say what they're noticing in this image is that actually this image combines many opposites. So this Buddha image, most Buddha images, you can see there's there's serenity, there's calm and peacefulness in this Buddha image, and yet there's a lot of energy and dynamism as well. The Buddha is very grounded. He's seated on grass there, and he's got a very kind of broad, secure-looking kind of base. His hands are on top of each other, kind of big, strong hands. So he's very grounded, and yet there's a sense of uplift in this image as well. Again, he's sitting upright. There's a kind of poise and energy there as well. And another opposite that we tend to bring out is that he seems very connected to the world around him. He's kind of almost kind of merging with the background, and yet he seems somehow above the usual goings on in the world. You know, he has the aura and again the peacefulness of his face. He doesn't look like he's kind of perturbed or like pushed about by the things that are going on in the world, and yet he's still very connected to the world. So these are some of the opposites that this image of the Buddha kind of bring out for us. So that might be just one way of you seeing, an image of the Buddha can give me a sense of enlightenment. And those opposites that I brought out can give us a sense of the qualities of the Buddha. And I'm going to move on now and talk about 3 particular qualities of enlightenment that we can draw out as a way of connecting with the Buddha and with enlightenment. So these are 3 particular qualities. These qualities don't define the Buddha and they don't define enlightenment. There's many ways I could talk about enlightenment, but these are 3 qualities that we can draw out. So these are wisdom, compassion, and energy. And Sangharakshita describes enlightenment as a state of clear awareness, of infinite love, and boundless energy. Clear awareness, infinite love, and boundless energy. So let's take the first one, wisdom. This is a direct seeing into the nature of reality. And again, Sangharakshita says that enlightenment is a state of direct, unmediated spiritual vision that sees all things directly, clearly, vividly, and truly. So aspects of Buddhist wisdom that mainly we've brought out through this whole entire theme. You can think of praticca samutpada, which is written on this block here, conditionality, conditioned co-production, the law of karma, the 4 noble truths, interconnectedness, the 3 lakshanas, all these lists. These are all aspects of Buddhist wisdom. But we really need to take this wisdom deep into our being to try and get some understanding of it. We need to try and see these things directly, clearly, vividly, and truly in Sangharakshita's words. So we do need to know these, it's helpful to know these lists, I would say. It's helpful to reflect upon these lists, read about the Buddhist ideas, talk about them, listen to talks about them. And actually I've got a quote from the Buddha. So Ananda is going to feature in this talk a fair bit. Ananda is the Buddha's chief disciple. And Ananda was saying to the Buddha apparently that although in appearance Buddhist wisdom might seem quite profound, it was actually quite easy to understand. But the Buddha says, "Say not so, Ananda, say not so. Deep indeed is this causal law, and deep it appears to be. It is by not knowing, by not understanding, by not penetrating this doctrine, that this world has become entangled like a ball of twine." So we do need to know, we do need to understand and penetrate this doctrine to really get a sense of Buddhist wisdom. However, this wisdom cannot be fully expressed in words, and it is difficult to understand merely intellectually. We need to have this deep reflection, this deep seeing, as I've been talking about. And Ananda, who often ends up being a bit of a fall guy, he was also saying to the Buddha at one point, I get this. And again, the Buddha says, "Say not so." This Dharma is deep, it's subtle, it's beyond the realm of words. So we do need to try and deeply understand it, but that is going to be an intuitive, direct seeing, not just a cognitive, intellectual seeing. In this way, it can involve the heart as well as the head. And insight is what kind of a lot of people are looking for within the path towards enlightenment. But insight can give that kind of sense of cognitive knowing, whereas insight really is a deep knowing. It's a heart knowing as well as a head knowing. And the realm of words, if we're not careful, we might make it seem as though we can just read that, oh yeah, I get that, I know that. We need to take it deeply. So this is Buddhist wisdom. So the Buddha, he needed to find words to communicate his vision, but none of these concepts actually fully communicate what enlightenment actually is in the experience of it. So analogies for this are that in a way the Buddha has provided us a map of how to traverse towards enlightenment, how to travel towards enlightenment. But when you're using a map, you know that isn't actually the place itself. So you might be in the Peak District, you might be on one of the Sangha walks, and Izzy or Jessica and John might be there. They've got their map, so you're not getting lost. That's handy. But you're in the Peak District, you can look around and you can see the landscape. If you looked at the map, you'd be missing something. So this is an analogy of the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist concepts. They're pointing us towards an experience of something that's much broader, actually, than the teachings themselves. And one way of thinking about this, which I think is quite fun, is that you could try and describe the taste of something to somebody, but they wouldn't actually know what that tasted like until they tasted it themselves. So, for example, a carrot, I would say, if you taste carrots, they're a bit kind of earthy, but they're also quite sweet. But what would you do with that? You'd have to actually eat a carrot to know what that tastes like. So again, I can tell you all the words I like about enlightenment, but it's an experience. And the Buddha, when he attained enlightenment, he did feel a bit like, how am I going to communicate this? People won't understand. I'll try and use words. I don't think this is how the Buddha actually thought, but this is what I'll try and use words. They won't understand. It will be really difficult. I just can't do it. And then various things happened, and one thing that happened was he had a vision of a lake of lotuses, and some lotuses were down in the mud, some were growing up through the water, some were breaking free of the water, some were completely blooming out of the water. And he realised, okay, there will be some people that I can help to grow, and they'll be all at their different stages, but if I can communicate something of this vision, people will grow towards enlightenment, and they will have a chance of experiencing it themselves. So that's one quality of enlightenment, wisdom, that I've tried to map out for you. Moving on to compassion, or metta, or empathy. The Sangharakshita says that enlightenment is a state of intense, profound, overflowing love and compassion. And one way that the Buddha was described in his life was he who was so kind. He who was so kind. And again, this is Ananda, his chief disciple. And he's saying it just at the point that the Buddha is about to die. He's about to reach final parinirvana. And Ananda is sad. He's sad that the Buddha is dying. And he leaves the Buddha's bedside and he says, "Alas, I am still a learner with so much to do, and the teacher is passing away, he who was so kind." So he could have said anything, lots of things I'm sure he could have said about the Buddha, but there he's specifically mentioning his kindness. And actually this then gets displayed as that sutta carries on, where the Buddha shows concern for Ananda. So the Buddha notices that Ananda isn't there, and he asks, "Where is he?" And he asks people to bring Ananda to him, and he knows that he's upset. And he says, "Enough, Ananda, do not weep and wail." He says, "Have I not told you that all things are impermanent?" And, you could read that as if like, "Oh, enough, Ananda, don't weep and wail, haven't I told you all things are impermanent?" But I like to think of it much more as a kind of like, he's really trying to help Ananda in this like very strong grief that Ananda's in. The Buddha's looking to help alleviate this situation for Ananda. "Have I not told you that all things are impermanent?" And then he goes on to rejoice in Ananda. He says, "For a long time, Ananda, you've been in the Buddha's presence, showing loving kindness. You have achieved much merit, Ananda. Make the effort, in a short time you will be liberated." So just like that whole kind of story, if you like, because I think it shows Ananda rejoicing in the Buddha as he who was so kind, and then the Buddha reaching out to Ananda at this time of grief and rejoicing in him and saying, you'll be okay, basically. And then in this same sutta, the Parinirvana Sutta, there's some more examples of the Buddha showing kindness, because he gets to the point of death through eating some pig's delight, it's called. So it's basically, he's eaten something that's off, and Kunda who's a smith, has given him this food, and the Buddha's there, in a lot of pain, in a lot of discomfort from the food poisoning, basically, that he's got, and he thinks, Kunda might feel remorse, he might feel that it's his fault, and so he says to his attendant, make sure that you go to Kunda and you say, don't feel remorse, don't think this is your fault, basically. So, again, this is him showing, he's thinking of other people, he's empathising with other people's situation, and he's reaching out, looking to show kindness, show compassion, even in his final days where he's in a lot of pain and a lot of discomfort. He's going beyond that and reaching out and showing kindness. So this compassion, this kindness, it's directly related to wisdom. So I'm talking about these three different qualities, but they are interrelated. So if you see the connectedness of everything, then you can act from a sense of solidarity with all beings. We're all connected, therefore kindness is the way. And Sangharakshita brings us out by talking about compassion and kindness as being the active component of wisdom. So you may have wisdom, but the active component of that will be kindness. And he says that it is in Maitri, or metta, that we may find the emotional equivalent of the intellectual understanding of the doctrine of no self. So you may think you have an intellectual understanding of the doctrine of no self, but actually if you do, then that will be shown through the emotional equivalent of kindness, of metta. So in a sense, no kindness, no wisdom. It doesn't matter how cleverly or intellectually we can grasp doctrines like no self if we can't apply that in the form of metta towards actual human beings. Another beautiful example of this in the Buddha's life is a story that's often known as the sick monk, or a monk with dysentery. So, it's Ananda again, I thought it was, just thought I'd check. Ananda and the Buddha, they're going around there, meeting people, greeting people, the Buddha's teaching, Ananda's listening. And they come across a monk who has dysentery. He's dirty, he's on the floor, he's in pain. And the Buddha checks, what is your sickness, monk? And the monk says, I have dysentery. And he's confused, he doesn't know why the other monks aren't looking after him, so they have a conversation about that. But in the meantime, the Buddha says to Ananda, go fetch some water, Ananda, we will wash this monk. So the Buddha doesn't come across this assembly of monks where there's one monk in the corner, in a different room maybe, who's sick and not being looked after, and says, monks, go and look after him. He actually washes him himself, and they put the water on the monk, they clean him up, they put him on a bed, they make sure he's comfortable. So there's the Buddha actively showing his kindness and his compassion. And then later the Buddha does go to the other monks and talks about how important it is that the Sangha looks after one another, because here we have each other in those cases of sickness. So that's a very clear example of the Buddha showing kindness, showing compassion. And there's so many stories, so many stories. And the Buddha, he seemed to be able to connect with everybody, with any sort of person. He showed a remarkable empathy. He could see what people needed, and he could speak their language so that they would understand him. He wouldn't just say exactly the same thing to every person. He'd understand and empathise with any particular person's situation and be able to teach them where they were in the language that they could hear. And I see, it's interesting that here we have the Buddha as the example of enlightenment, and I see, glimpses of the Buddha in my spiritual friends, and I know people, particularly here, people like Amoghavanksa, like Maitrivāsan, like Andy, who can do approach people with kindness and empathy, in the sense that whoever they are, there's a connection that can be made. Yeah. Particularly Andy. I mean, I did look at you because I thought you might have asked them, but I would really like to rejoice in you. Here you are, doing the filming, but you're supporting pretty much every intro course. I mean, pretty much, if you've been on an intro course in the last couple of years, I would imagine Andy would have been there, connecting with people, making sure people feel at ease, and sharing the Dharma with them. So the Buddha, he devoted his life to helping others to liberate themselves. And even if they didn't reach liberation, he devoted his life to helping them to lead wholesome, happy lives. And when he did have disciples, and he had many, he exhorted them to practice and teach for the welfare of the many, not just for their own sakes, but for the welfare of the many. He said to people, go out and teach for the happiness of gods and humans. And he saw his life in these terms as well. He dedicated his life to helping others. Okay, so the third aspect of enlightenment that I'm going to focus on is energy. Sometimes this is spoken of as virya, which is a Pali or Sanskrit word, maybe both, I'm not sure, which means energy in the pursuit of the good, of the skillful. So this is energy, strength, courage, virya. And Sangha actually had quite a lot to say about energy. He said, enlightenment consists in a state or experience of inexhaustible mental and spiritual energy. The state of enlightenment is one of tremendous energy, of absolute spontaneity, continually bubbling forth, a state of uninterrupted creativity. The state of enlightenment is a state of perfect, unconditioned freedom from all subjective limitations. Sounds good. So the Buddha, as he taught, he was extraordinarily energetic. So the area that he taught in was wide. He walked from place to place over a very large part of northern India and Nepal, teaching, connecting with his followers, making new connections with people throughout his life. And he lived a long time. He lived until he was 80, and I think he gained enlightenment when he was 31 or 33 or something. So he, for the rest of his life after enlightenment, he was walking around a really large area, connecting with people. And even when he was 80, when he had this final illness I was talking about, he continued to walk from place to place, seeing his followers for the last time. He disregarded pain and illness, and he kept putting his energy towards teaching, towards meeting with people. And in this sutta describing this time, his final illness, he describes his body as like an old cart held together with straps. And he said that the only time he felt comfortable was when he was in deep meditation. And yet there he was, carrying on, going out to meet people. And in this image of the Buddha that we have here, and in this image of the Buddha, he's seated in meditation. I think a lot of you will probably relate to, if you see a figure of the Buddha, he's normally seated in meditation. But this could be quite misleading, because as I'm saying, obviously the Buddha did meditate. You would have seen him sitting in meditation, but you would have also seen him walking from place to place, actively engaging, expressing energy through teaching, through connecting with people. And sometimes you may see Buddha figures, Buddha images walking, particularly in India. There's an amazing statue in Nagaloka, which is in Nagpur, where there's a large centre, Nagaloka, that does a lot of courses for people. And those of you who've been there, you remember there's a very, very large walking Buddha. And perhaps this is a bit more, just to include that image of the Buddha as you imagine the Buddha, rather than just seated in meditation. We can imagine the Buddha walking as he did for most of his life as he taught. And maybe this figure of him walking expresses this aspect of energy that I'm talking about. Okay, so these qualities of the Buddha, wisdom, compassion, and energy, they can give us a sense of the goal. They can give us a sense of how to aim towards and move in the direction of enlightenment. So I like to think of this as enlightenment kind of means seeing with wisdom. It means acting kindly and with compassion, and it means expressing energy, putting our energy towards what is beneficial for ourselves and others. And in this sense, enlightenment is a very active element. If we become enlightened, it's not just a passive achievement. Oh, I'm enlightened. Cool. It's active, it's a doing. We will be seeing things with wisdom, we'll be acting kindly, we'll be expressing energy through enlightenment. And we can reflect on whether we ourselves notice that we are beginning to embody these characteristics more and more as we develop spiritually. So I was having a think about this today, and I was thinking, yes, I think I probably can, for example, see impermanence more fully than I used to be able to. I think I have a different understanding of death than I used to. I'm not so kind of against it as this wrong thing, and yet I know that when my loved ones die, I will feel grief and pain. But yeah, I think I do see impermanence more fully, more directly than I used to, just for an example. I think I am more able to respond with kindness in the face of suffering if I'm with a loved one who is suffering. I think I am more likely to be able to respond with kindness rather than horrified anxiety, which is how I maybe used to respond more often. So I think I can be kinder. And when I got to energy, I was thinking, this one felt a little bit trickier for me as I was reflecting on it. I do work with sloth and torpor. You'll remember that hindrance. I'm not kind of free completely of sloth and torpor. But then I was thinking about when I'm on retreat, when I'm in really good conditions, I'm up at 6:15 a.m, no problem, doing some Tai Chi. This was on my retreat a few weeks ago, meditating. I do have energy to call upon. Yes, there are distractions. Yes, there are things that might conflict with my energy. But generally, I do have energy, and my spiritual practice, the meditation practice that I have, supports that. And when I am in meditation, it's like a power-up, boost, energy-giving thing, which I appreciate. And I was also thinking about energy in terms of it being a bit like a stamina or staying power. Energy in the form of commitment. So here we all are, we're at Sangha night. Many of us come to Sangha night, most weeks, the weeks that we can come, we come. And there's energy there in pursuit of what will help us to spiritually develop. We're here. So I've described these qualities of the Buddha, but as I said right at the beginning of the talk, the Buddha is more than this. There is something deeply mysterious about the Buddha, and you could think of him almost like from a different dimension. And it's difficult to convey this in words, and that's why we have images, and that's why we use our imagination. But here's some descriptions that kind of hint at this deeply mysterious way in which enlightenment will manifest, and did manifest in the Buddha. He was known as being beyond all worldly happenings whatsoever. He was known as the trackless one. So I don't know about you, but often I think I do leave a bit of a trail of stuff behind me. But the Buddha was trackless. He was completely without trail. And some of you will know Siddhi, who was one of our elders and who really kind of brought the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, the Sheffield Sangha, into being with the help of others, who sadly died a couple of years ago. But I used to think of him as a trackless one, because he used to come and unpack boxes when we used to work in the evolution shop. We used to have a gift shop. And you'd see me unpacking, I was like, like highlighters, pens everywhere, bits of foam everywhere. But Siddhi would come in every other week, he'd do his unpacking, he'd leave the place spotless, he'd go upstairs and he'd have his banana and peanut butter sandwich. And there was just something so mindful, something so kind of trackless about him that I really appreciated. So yes, the trackless one. The Buddha was known as the man of naught, as in like zero. So he was completely beyond any category of identification. You couldn't say he's this, he's that. And people tried it, no, it's just not any of that. Yes, mysterious. Nirvana is known as the deathless, so you could ponder on what that would mean to be, able to achieve or live in the deathless. And enlightenment is known as the unbounded mind. The unbounded mind. And also, just quite simply, the Buddha actually means one who is awake. So what does that mean, to be awake? Fully and perfectly awake. So these are some descriptions that give us a sense of the mystery of enlightenment in the form of the Buddha. And next week we're going to continue with seeing how different images, how myth and symbol can give us an even fuller understanding of the goal and of the qualities of enlightenment. So do come back next week. But for now, I'm going to give you some homework. Hooray! So to prepare you in between now and then next week, I am going to suggest that you bring the Buddha to mind. You could bring the Buddha to mind as you meditate this week, maybe at the beginning of the meditation, in the middle, at the end. Just see what bringing the Buddha to mind as you meditate this week is like. You can also bring the Buddha to mind as you go about your daily activities. So brushing your teeth, going to work, being at work, whatever it is that you do during the day, the washing up, whatever it is. You could think to yourself, how would the Buddha respond to this circumstance? How would the Buddha be in the world as it is now, as I am in it now? And there's this amazing poem that I couldn't track down that Shantasiddhi knows. So any of you know Shantasiddhi, ask her about the poem of the Buddha in the supermarket, because it's brilliant. Some of you will have heard it. And the Buddha in the supermarket isn't how you would imagine, how I would have thought he was. Anyway, just think, if you're going to the supermarket, think, how would the Buddha be here now? And you could seek to deepen your imaginative connection with the Buddha. Maybe you could kind of read stories of the Buddha, you could think, what is it in nature maybe that connects me to the Buddha? Just any way in which you can bring the Buddha to mind, imaginatively connect with the Buddha as the historical Buddha, as the mythic Buddha, whatever way works for you. And perhaps if you don't have a shrine at home, or if you do have a shrine at home and it doesn't have the Buddha on it, then make a shrine, place the Buddha there, and see what happens. Thank you.